You're back, and I'm back. This makes a great party. And welcome to video 3 in my 6-part series on how to create a VSL. This is going to cover step 2 of the 5-step VSL process. That's a lot of numbers. I know, write them down if you're confused. But today it's all about rapport, connection, establishing a story, the things that you have to do to sell something. We are going to talk about it today. I am John Benson, and this is Sales Copy Secrets. Okay, if you have not watched the very first or second video in this series, you need to do that first. Otherwise, this is going to be a little confusing. So be sure to check out those links. They're either up above my head or below or both. And as always, if I earn your like, if I share something with you, there you go, man, that's going to help me a lot. Do me a favor, subscribe below, click the like button, share this video with friends, and click that notification bell. I am going to dive into stuff now. So let's go. Step 2 is called the vital connection, and it involves the following steps. Number 1 is your modest introduction. Number 2 is your nightmare story. Number 3 is a transition into your big problem. Number 4 is called about the system. Number 5 is the results of the system. And number 6 is a transition into the next step, which is going to be the big problem. Okay, we're going to go into each of the 6 in detail. First up is your modest introduction. Now, I created this at a time when internet marketers were saying, "Hi, I'm John Benson. I have 19 Ferraris. I have a very large dog." And despite the fact that that may be true, that's irrelevant because no one cares. Your audience doesn't care that you drive a car or make all this money except for this much. So think of it this way. When you're at a party and you're meeting someone new, how fast would you turn that person off if the very first thing you said was something about how great you are, all your bling, whatever you want to call it? What are the kids calling it today? I don't know. That's not a good way to start a VSL. So we start with a modest introduction, and it's a very simple way to do it. You can say something like this. Hey, I'm John Benson, and hey, I was not always on the cover of a fitness magazine. I mean, hardly. I used to be clinically obese. Now, that's how I started my VSLs for weight loss, because that is a true story. I went from being clinically obese to shooting for the cover of Iron Man magazine up here or up there, wherever my editor decides to put that. So that was kind of crazy, but it was a modest way to introduce myself to this new audience, this new person that is listening to me possibly for the very first time without saying, "Hey, I'm John Benson. I have a master's degree in kinesiology and a PhD in biomechanical engineering for fat cells," or whatever. Yes, your credentials kind of matter, but not really. You want to modestly introduce yourself. If it's important, because in other words, if you're a financial advisor and you need to say, "Hey, I'm Joe Bob and I have a degree in finance from Harvard," and all that stuff, you still want to get to the point where you say, "And you know what? I wasn't always a financial expert. In fact, I remember when I was a kid, I couldn't even count pennies. I thought they were nickels." So something like that, something that disarms the user and brings them into a state where they're saying to themselves, he or she, they're kind of like me, just a little bit more advanced, or they're an expert, but they seem really down to earth. That's what you want to get across, because that's going to open somebody's heart and mind up to hearing what you have to say. Next up is the hard part. It's called the nightmare story. Now, in case you think that you don't have a nightmare story, I can tell you from doing this from over 10 years now, that everyone who tells me that they don't have one, I pull it out of them. They do. But if you don't want to use your own nightmare story, use a customer or a client or a patient's nightmare story. Take any precautions you need to take to protect their identity and all that stuff, but it's nowhere near as impactful. Just know that. So a nightmare story is your worst possible day ever in relationship to what you're selling. And I'm going to walk you through my original nightmare story. We're going to shorten it a lot because this will be a long video otherwise. And I'm going to give you the steps. There's the overview. And the overview is just the synopsis of the story. You're going to say something like, "I'm going to tell you a horrific story about how I nearly killed myself over a fixation for sugar by doing the dumbest thing I've ever done, almost went to jail, and learned a valuable lesson in the process." Step 2 is an introduction, and basically you're using some storytelling techniques here. It's pretty simple. You want to describe the setting where you're at. Like, you don't want to say, I was driving in a car and this happened. You would want to say something like, I was driving down a road I was very familiar with, but it was icy and raining. And my friend Steve was driving his new, 2006 Mustang convertible, and the thing slid everywhere. So I just told a little bit of a story. I'm not going into Game of Thrones detail.
One word and I hit you again.
Okay, we're not talking about like books this thick about your story, but just give a little bit of nuance to the story. Think about what you were wearing. Now, in my case, what I was wearing was super important because I remember it like it was yesterday. I was wearing my oversized black leather jacket, and it was oversized for a simple reason. I had a big old 48-inch waistline. Next up, I'm going to go into what I call the bad part. The bad part, okay? The bad part of the story is something that's setting up the next step, which is the really bad part. The bad part of the story is I had a sugar fix, and I had to pull over at the nearest convenience store as soon as humanly possible. So I told Steve to take a right now so he could dive into this 24-hour convenience store so I could get my fix. And I noticed as I was walking into the store that there were two prostitutes, very cold, with blankets, shivering right there near the doorway. And I felt so bad. And I thought to myself, man, my life sucks right now because I'm so overweight and I'm struggling with my health, but at least I'm not a prostitute. It could be worse. At least I'm not whoring myself out for drugs. And I was saying these very judgmental things, which is true. By the way, this is a true story. And I was thinking to myself, why am I thinking these horrible things about these two human beings? And I thought to myself, are there blankets in my truck? No, I should carry blankets in my truck. And I was going through this, and all this conversation was going through my mind. I didn't include that in my original story, but I did include all the other stuff. Now the really bad part. The really bad part was the fact that I was so desperate that I had left my wallet at my office, unknowing to me when I walked in the door, and I had to have my sugar fix. I didn't want to drive back to the office and back to the convenience store. It was already like 2 a.m, so I stole the ding dongs. Now, I said donuts in the story because people understand donuts, but that's a very minor change to make. I stole them. I stuck a bunch of them in my coat, and the guy didn't even notice it as I walked out the door. And as I walked out the door, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And this is what we call the Declaration of Independence. Okay, named after my hero, Thomas Jefferson. So the Declaration of Independence. That's the state when you hit rock bottom. When you said, at some point in my life, that was it. I drew a line in the sand. I said, no more. And for me, the story went something like this. I walked outside and I looked again at the prostitutes shivering on the street corner. And I said to myself, you are every bit as bad or worse. You know better. You can survive. You have all the advantages, and you are whoring yourself out for freaking sugar. You're willing to steal. You're willing to break the law for sugar. You're not addicted to a drug. You're addicted to sugar. You are the same. And that was the line in the sand for me. That was when I knew I had crossed all moral boundaries and I had to do something. So I gave the donuts back, came back in the next day and actually paid for them is what I did. So I actually took them home, which is even worse. So I gave them back. And since I came back in, I said, I knew the guy. And I said, hey, here's your money. I feel really stupid about this. And the guy was really, really cool about it. But I don't recommend stealing things. So just FYI. But I'd never stolen anything before, and I never stole anything since. But that was a traumatic experience for me. And I remember thinking to myself, I came back and I brought blankets to those two women that were there. And I just remember just wanting to tell them, man, I'm such a jackass for feeling this way. But it really waked me up. But I just wanted to just give them the blankets because I felt like they were really cold. But the point of the story is this story moved so many people into listening to more of what I had to say when it comes to weight loss, because obviously I was so bad off, I was willing to steal from it. And it's a compelling story. So I wrote my own nightmare story. That might not be yours, obviously, okay? But you want to conclude that story with a moral journey, by the way. That's the last thing I do in the story. And the moral journey for me is kind of what I alluded to, that I was no better than the other person. So that's essentially the framework of a nightmare story. It's a lot more detailed and nuanced than that, and that's why I suggest you pick up Now VSL. The link is going to be in the description. You want to check that out. That is my VSL software that actually has copy already written for you that helps you walk you through every one of these steps. steps so you really get under your fingers. But if you can't do that right now, that's cool, because I'm still going to give you all the information I can, okay? Now, the next step in this process is what we call the transition into the big problem. And what this is really more of a hint that there's something coming up that they need to know about. And the hint goes something like this. So I'm a lot like you. In fact, I may be even worse off than you. And it was through my own journey, through this pain of X, in my case, obesity, that led me to understand the number one problem that we really face. And it's not what you think. I'm going to share it with you in just a moment. That is the transition to the big problem. The next step is called about the system. And that basically hints that there's a system to follow to overcome the problem. So basically, it's something to the effect of this. This problem led me to discover and perfect a system that allowed me to overcome my own blank. In this case, my own cravings and my own inabilities to stick to a normal diet. The results of the system is in the next step, and that's simply that this thing allowed me to do X. So in my case, this allowed me to lose over 70 pounds of pure fat, put on 12 pounds of muscle, and change my body from an overweight, obese, clinically male that was on his way to a heart attack to a part-time fitness model and a fitness author. So if I can do it, you can do it too. And the last step is the transition that opens the loop to the big problem. And I say something to the effect of this. And it all started the day I realized the problem that we face isn't what we think it is. We've been lied to, we've been deceived. You won't believe what it is, so keep watching. Okay, that gets us to the end of step 2 of the 5-step VSL process and the third video in the series. The next video in the series is going to be all about the big problem. And I'm going to give you a hint. You need to make the problem much, much bigger than your customer or potential customer believes it is. Because guess what? It is. And I'm going to prove it to you in the next video. Be sure to watch it right now. I'm John Benson. And until you watch that next video, I want you to remember this. I want you to be unignorable.